we change the agendas every year, and because the world changes. So by definition, you have to change the topics. And so we are going to talk about AI and the application to pharma and medicine, because it's a hot topic, which part of it is real and part of it is fake. But I think our speakers will help us understand. But I do believe that the pharmaceutical industry happens to be one of the better applications for AI. There are a lot of other ones which are just pipe dreams, but I think for the drug industry. And so I'm very, very pleased to have Najat Khan as our speaker, and just as pleased to have Fred Hassan, who's a good friend for many years and a legend in the industry, as the interview. They're going to do this as a fireside chat. And I have no idea what questions they have decided to talk about, but I will let Fred introduce her background. But as you will hear, she really is exceptionally qualified to talk about this topic. So let me turn this over. So now I give this to Fred, right?
Thank you very much, Peter. And we have very, very, very impressive people here. We're talking a lot about innovation, and in many ways, this is called the bioscience century. We're talking about knowledge about disease pathways, better targets, better tools in the toolkit to get those targets, and really adding on the power of technologies, primarily AI, Gen AI, and many others. It's just turning out to be a fantastic time. I do gather big pharma CEOs once a year, and I had a very good conversation this year with 8 of them in January. And to my surprise, typically it's a pretty, there are always 2 or 3 who are very skeptical. On the subject of AI, Gen AI, it's a remarkable consensus. In fact, they're all moving forward. They don't know exactly where the low-hanging fruit is, but they're very excited about the whole prospects. Now, next to me is Najat Khan, who I've known for many, many years. She is a very well-known person in the pharmaceutical industry. She knows the business and she knows science. She's science and tech, both. And now she's the top person under the CEO at Recursion. She's taken the courageous step of going there from Johnson & Johnson, where she did a fantastic job. And we're really very fortunate to be here with her. And I'm going to be asking her a few questions. So may I start with the first one, Najat?
Yeah.
So they say that, so it's more a general question. So recently the Google CEO was on television saying that it's like electricity. So electricity arrived in 1880, and many industries grew and grew and grew as a result of it. People didn't know exactly where the applications were, but they grew and grew and grew. And he said, this is like electricity. There'll be applications everywhere. And he thinks it's only 5 years away when this is going to go mainstream. He was also mentioning that ChatGPT got 100 million subscribers in the first year. There's never been such a fast adoption of technology. What's your sense? Is this like electricity?
Thank you, Fred. First of all, it's such an honor to share the stage with Fred. Definitely one of the legends. I call him the OG. And he was the OG. But just so much to learn from Fred. Fred, it's a really good question in terms of electricity. I think so, but let's unpack that a little bit. When you think about the power of AI, it's not just in one specific area. So a lot of people talk about, can you write a prompt and can it summarize something for you? That's the easy stuff. The next thing is, can it generate new ideas for you? That's the harder stuff. Sometimes it hallucinates, and sometimes it doesn't, but it's getting much, much better at a pace that's quite astonishing. I remember last year when somebody asked me this question, I was like, oh yeah, ChatGPT is like an analyst you have year 1, and now it's already like a senior analyst. So learning really fast. And I think if you think about it in the healthcare space, there's so many questions that we talked about, everything from can we do it in a digital format in terms of pharmacy? Can we predict and design better molecules given our failure rate is like 90% to get a drug to market? Like, there's a ton of questions. There are applications of AI across the entire spectrum. And that's why I think it is like electricity. We use it for so many different applications, more than if you ever go back and read the articles back in the day, in the 50s, it was a very narrow application and now it's expanded so much. So if we take the pharmaceutical space as an example, the use of AI is both across improving the probability of success and efficiency. So there's two levels. I think in terms of improving the probability of success, everything starts with understanding what's driving the disease. And today we look at it from a single target perspective. It's a single protein that's not working well. But the truth of the matter is there's more than one protein at play, usually. Polypharmacology, as much of it as an issue, it's actually the reality. So if you can pick up the biology much, much better, which is like your first principles, then you know what's driving the problem. Easier to solve when you holistically know what's driving the problem. So that's one. How does AI play a role? I mean, recursion as an approach, but there's many other approaches, which is you're using machine learning, large-scale multi-omic data to not just understand a protein in a cell, but the holistic aspect around the cell, expression levels and so forth. And we can go into more details. Okay, so you know the problem, but what's the next step? It's how do you make a molecule that can actually reverse the negative effect of the disease? The way we do it today, and many people will quote this number, they'll say, look, small molecule chemistry, there's about 10 to the 60th permutations you can make. More than the grains of sand on a beach or something like that. That's all great. But the true power of it is generative AI. There are molecules that are being developed, and I'm an organic chemist and a computer scientist by training, I would have never imagined. So I think the generative power is huge because you're starting from a much broader space. And then, of course, once you go into the clinic, that's when it really gets real. Like, are you targeting the right patients? And often we don't. And you can also use multi-omic data to pinpoint the right patient. So I'll give an example and then I'll head it back to Fred. Like RBM39, this is a degrader in the oncology space, solid tumors akin to CDK12, 13, very, very hard to drug. People have tried for like 4 or 5 decades. From the insight in terms of the biology to developing the molecule to getting it to start a program in the clinic was 18 months. Generally, that takes 50 months in industry. And the reason is you're using a completely different approach, and we can go into that in terms of how you identify the biology, the chemistry, and how you get into the clinic with the right patient stratification. So there's an efficiency play because you do it at scale, but quite frankly, I'm more focused on the probability of technical, regulatory, and commercial success. That is where we're going to win.
Thank you very much. So Peter said earlier that pharmaceutical industry, the biopharma industry, really is a great area for AI because it's got so much complexity in it. And yet it looks like the uptake has been very fast in other sectors. Is there a mindset challenge among scientists in biopharma or even commercial people? I've heard, for example, that commercial is actually a very good low-hanging fruit area, but a lot of the commercial people have some mindset issues. Any comments on that problem in terms of adoption? How come financial services have moved so far and so fast, and biopharma hasn't yet?
It's a great question. Having been the chief data science officer at a large pharma company, I can tell you, I mean, a huge part of it is, of course, the mindset, but pharma industries in general have high margins. So whenever a company has, or an industry, not generics, has high margins, what's the reason to change? I mean, that's the truth of it. Like, do we really have a burning platform? I would say we do. But for in the day-to-day, a lot of the times it doesn't feel like there's a burning platform. Yes, it takes, 9 years to make a drug and it will have X, Y, and Z margins, but okay. I think that is, I mean, I hate to say this, but I think that is one of the reasons. The second is also just a lack of understanding of how to use it. Fred, you mentioned this. I think everybody knows what the pain points are, but then how do you deploy it? Sometimes it means your job changes. That's threatening. right? I've seen that firsthand. And this has happened over many, many generations, electricity, steam engines, et cetera, et cetera. I think you have two ways to respond. Either you evolve or you get evolved. So how do you evolve? And that's really around how do you educate yourself? You don't have to be a coder to actually understand AI. It's just like another science or another technical topic. But it's more important to understand how to use it, what not to do, what to do. And I think given the complexity of the pharma industry, the regulations that are there, the limited understanding of biology today, I think there's just a fear of both personally being threatened, like your job at stake, but also like, do I want to tinker around with something that is so hard to succeed? I mean, we're one of the most like high risk industries, if you think about it overall, but we're also one of the most conservative industries, which is there's such a dichotomy there. So I've seen a lot of folks say, but if I use this and then it messes things up, then I'm gonna be 5 years behind. I just won't try. And I always say it's not an option not to try, because 10% success rate in 10 years and $3 billion, are you kidding me? We can't keep doing that. It's not gonna be sustainable at some point. Or I would say now it's not. So I think there's that piece. And the last thing, Fred, I would say is where I've seen, so I founded a consortium called Disrupt, which brings together the top 13 pharma companies, their AI leaders together, and we did a benchmarking. And essentially what you saw is, it's like, and it was published in Nature, so it's public, you can look at it. It's essentially what you saw is it's a land of pilots. Good ideas get started, but it's really hard to scale because there also has to be top-down mandate. A lot of CEOs will say, we should do it, but the next lieutenant in charge is not bought it, or they don't have the budget. Sorry, but it comes down to money, right? Like where you don't just do one project and say, see, I used AI. I think for financial services where they've really succeeded is some very specific use cases. And you're starting to see that in pharma, automation of documents, authoring it faster, but that's not going to have a game-changing advancement in how we make a drug. It's going to be the hard stuff. Do we really understand the biology? Can we make a molecule nobody would ever envision? Like, I'll give you an example. Recursion is in the process of merging / acquiring a company called Exscientia. And one of the reasons why we did that is Recursion's start was in biology, Exscientia is in chemistry. You need both. You need the two to tango to make a drug. And with Exscientia, they have molecules that instead of synthesizing 20, 15, 5,000 molecules, you have 200 molecules and you get to the right one. So you get to it faster, you synthesize less, you're so much better at in silico. You're doing 80 to 90% of it all the algorithm. And then you get to the last piece, which is chemistry validation. That's a very different way of doing things. It's hard, it's not easy. But I do think like that took a very different mindset, because for people in those types of organizations, they tend to be what I say bilingual, deeply knowledgeable in science, discovery, development, etc., but also in data science, AI, and vice versa. And I think that's what you need. That's the secret sauce to ensure that the excellence is equal in both disciplines, and you pull it through in your decision making. Not just I'm going to do it the old way and add a splash of AI on top. We will never succeed.
And I think similarly, they say that in commercial, the old marketers need to really be bilingual, data first, omni-channel first, content being consumed in a modular manner by digitally native doctors and consumers. It's a different mindset. And I think commercial also has the same challenges as you see in discovery and development. So they say that the cost of healthcare in the US in particular, which is the pivotal market, is becoming unsustainable. We're getting close to the 20% mark. The industry is extremely innovative, but there are massive barriers to innovation getting adopted. So the industry has to think beyond the bill and be part of the solution in bending the overall healthcare cost curve. Now, we heard from Doug, I think a few years ago, there are industries at 14% of the total healthcare cost. It might have moved up a little bit even more now, but it doesn't matter if we get to 18 or 19%, as long as the total healthcare costs are brought down. Can AI help deal with this problem of total healthcare cost curve?
That's a great question. Maybe, just to make it real, maybe I'll use like an example from the start to finish, and we can at least, and then I'll tie a little bit into where it's happening and where it's not happening, and we should do it. One of the reasons why, let's just start with therapeutics, it costs a lot of money, is because of our huge failure rate. So we are going through many assays and discovery, we're going through many molecules, and it's taking like 5-6 years. Like, if you look at some of the tech bio companies, half the population, the company itself is computer scientists, and half are scientists. Like, Recursion has like 15 medicinal chemists, and a pipeline that has like 20 programs. When I first got there, I was like, how? And that's because you're doing so much computationally. So essentially, you're failing using your computer, but you're not failing by going to the CRO, running an experiment, coming back, doing the experiment again. You're also starting with a better hypothesis of what's driving the disease. So you're not searching. You have a good, and you're starting with the human first. Because like the way Recursion does it is you actually start with multi-omic patient data. You're not starting with mouse data and then they can translate it to human. So that's a lot of the failure rate that happens. So that's number one, right? So you're just going through it much faster, 18 months instead of 3-4 years. That's savings. Then the next part of it is, how do you run the trials? Like I always say this, but like 70% of the dollars to make a drug is actually clinical development. Running trials is incredibly expensive. And this is where I think there's a comparison to commercial too. I asked that commercial and Recursion. How do we find patients for trials today? We call clinical sites and say, I have a patient that is X, Y, and Z, third line, relapse refractory, multiple myeloma, blah, blah, blah. And they say, well, I think I have 5 patients. Okay. If you ever do the analysis of how accurate that is, it's very humbling. It's not at all accurate. Instead, today you have claims data, other real world data. You can actually figure out, and all the data is de-identified, but you have a heat map of where the eligible patients are. So instead of taking years, like 2 years to start up studies, you're doing that in months. Like programs we're recruiting in under a month, 2 months. It totally changes it on its head. I compare it to, if I wanted to go see Fred, I would not, and I live in New York, Fred lives in Florida. I wouldn't go and ask everybody on my road trip to say, where does Fred live? That's what we do today. I would just use Google Maps and be really smart and go straight. Isn't that much more efficient? Yes. Isn't that putting the patient in the center? Yes. So why don't we do that? Not sure. But that's because of the fact we're using data. This is to your point. And then what you can do is you can reduce the length of the trial, which is a huge amount of money. If you also use multi-omic data, which is, let me give you an example. Essentially what you do is, instead of saying anybody with pancreatic cancer will respond, you can take their tumors in discovery and you can just do ex vivo testing of your compound. And you see, where are you seeing response? Where are you seeing certain biomarkers go up? So you can predict who's going to respond versus not. That's what we're starting to do now. So then you don't go into the clinic and have 200 people and then hope to God that there's 50 that will respond, and then do another study with those 50 people, and then do another study with 150, because you have to, of course, show them, can you be smarter earlier? That is a huge amount of cost. And then for commercial, what you can also do is the same data that you use to recruit patients to figure out the destination is the same data you need to figure out which PIs, which physicians, which practices to go to. We don't do that today. I mean, a lot of the market, they would say, sales folks will say, no, I have a better sense. I don't need the data. But it's like, it augments you. It doesn't replace you as long as you know how to use it. And this is the whole point of evolving or being involved. So then you say broader healthcare. If I look at, and I was just at Mayo the other day, the amount of efficiencies to be gained by being much more effective around pre-authorizations, around documentation, around the pajama time that physicians talk about, where you're just writing reports. It's crazy. They shouldn't be doing that. These are low, hanging stuff, but we can do it better. There's also other aspects in terms of waiting time and practices. Like the list goes on and on, quite frankly. you can take a lot of the efficiency out of the system, but it comes down to having the grit and the resilience to say, I'm gonna try something different, and I'm gonna keep working at it until I get better. Because there's a lot of pilots which is like, oh, it's not that better, see, I knew how to do it right, see, I tried it, we tried AI, it doesn't work. We just can't keep doing that. The last thing I'll say is, and this is kind of controversial, but if you look at what Lilly and Pfizer have done recently, Lilly Direct, for instance, where you can actually, you're not even going to your physician. It's like a telehealth. You meet with the prescribers and they deliver it to your house, the prescriptions. Now, there is a lot of conversations, is this the right thing to do versus not? But if you ask patients from an access perspective, and this is, we're doing it all for patients at the end of the day, and have a sustainable business that keeps helping them, they love it. So, but if you look at the cost, it's like 1/10 of the cost of what it usually takes to get a drug, not just to the patient, but to see the patient, and there's a higher percentage of getting, reimbursed per your payer terms. It's a very different way of doing things.
It's a huge opportunity. Now, we do have some time at the end. We're going to be done in a few minutes. But if anybody has any questions on AI, would love to entertain them. Also from the virtual audience. Yeah, Peter, you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question, which is, we've spent a lot of time thinking about AI and talking to a lot of the leading people in it. And what is clear is it's a great innovation. It's also clear that it has its flaws. And it also is clear that it shouldn't be used. It can only works in certain cases, right? And so I think that is true for the pharma. And as I said, in general, the application is great for pharma, but partly because one of the weaknesses of AI is data. It's only as good as the cleanliness and the quality of the data. In pharma, they have more of an ability to have controlled data that's accurate as opposed to others. The other is that actually, sadly, customers are not being charged a true cost of producing the answer. They're spending billions of dollars, but you have to account for $30. So of course, everybody for free or for a small amount will use it. If the true cost of getting that answer when you went through, a lot of things would disappear. But I guess the question is this: what kind of criteria do you use in order to figure out where AI, whether it's labor savings or clinical trials, is effective and economic, and where it's really, a false tool? I mean, as I say, you could use a hammer. Wait, listen to me. You could use a saw to try to hammer a nail, but it doesn't work really well. And I think we have a lot of people who are using a saw to try to hammer a nail, right?
I would almost flip the question in terms of, do we have enough problems that we can't find solutions for? Yes. Have we hammered it home? Yes. And we're not getting a better solution? Yes. Then I would say you have enough opportunity to try to innovate. One has to be practical. You don't use AI in everything. Like, one of the things I did at J&J, and same thing here as well, is we prioritize where you can make a difference. So I have a very simple framework. One is, what is the impact you can have, whether it's efficiency, probability of success, etc. And the other is feasibility. And in that feasibility lens, you have data. Is the data high quality? Yes, we have good data in pharma in terms of clinical trials, but not in discovery. I've seen it from the inside. It's all over the place, right? And even if the data is organized, it's not always useful. Because for AI, you need to actually measure it in a repeatable, generalizable way, similar conditions. It's a very different way to curate it the right way. Right? The second is also regulatory. Like if you want to submit something to the FDA, there's very different levels of what you need to do that. But if you're trying to find patients for trials, it's directionally. What's the worst that's going to happen? It's going to tell you about a site where you call them up and they're like, no, we don't have any patients. Like that almost never happens, by the way. We've tried it. There's so many fears that it's not going to work. I always tell my teams is, tell me why it won't work. Don't tell me why it will. Tell me why it will work, not tell me why it won't work. Prove to me why it won't work, right? And those are your proof of concept. So like, there's a lot of fear, like it's not going to help. Well, let's try it, run the experiment, and then we'll see. The other thing I'll also say is it's really important to use it not for important things, but also to do it in a responsible way. AI and ethics, and I built that at J&J, building that here as well. What does that mean? It means that what are the guardrails and best practices of how you use data, how you use it in a reproducible way, how do you make sure that it's safer? I feel like that's true for any discipline that we do. The challenge is that, ChatGPT and other elements, like things have come out so quickly. It's worked and not worked. The guardrails weren't always there. Same thing happened with Google search in the beginning. I mean, it's the same process happening again. The last thing I'll just say in terms of the cost, was it 2 weeks ago, there was an algorithm developed. It rivals what OpenAI has. It rivals what David Baker and others just got the Nobel Prize for. And it used 1/10 of the compute. It's this company called Chai Discovery. It's called Chai, CHAI, #1. It's super cool, but I was like, wow, how did they do that? So there is and it's a startup of 5 people, and I'm not on their board, and I'm not pushing for it. I'm just saying there is innovation happening even on that side, and it's not something I would even imagine. So I think there is a lot of focus on also the cost and the energy burn and other things that it takes. But I'll just end by saying, as with anything powerful, it can be used the wrong way, but there's no option not to try.
So, yeah, we have one last question. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Isaac Klein, CSO at DuPont Therapeutics. Thanks for joining and sharing your perspective. A quick question about explainability. Where do you see our industry on explainability now when it comes to something like RBM39 or CDK7 and then optimized chemistry? We have great explainability. Everyone's comfortable.
Yep.
Pharma executives can, like, that's the target. That's the whole thing. When you start talking about things like complex disease, polypharmacology, or selecting patients for clinical trials, the AI is and will tell us about things that we don't understand. Where do you see the acceptance of that?
Depends on where you sit in the pharma industry. And look, I would say that if you look at some of the drugs developed in the 50s, 60s, we don't really understand their mechanism of action fully either, right? We accepted it, we did it in a different way, we didn't run the trials. I'm not saying that's the right way. To me, it's an and strategy. So there are programs that, at least, for instance, we have in Recursion where, you start with phenomics, which is you have these cell lines, right? Human cell lines, and you do these perturbations, you do knockouts, and then you test different drugs, and you see that there is phenomically a similar signature to something you know. All right, great. Then you use transcriptomic to validate that, proteomic. So you've done, and then you use clinical genomic data like tempus and so forth. So you have a really good hypothesis, but you don't really know all the targets. You might know one of like 5. Then the next aspect is, what I like to do is you actually also do wet lab validation, right? And you say, can I deconvolute the MOA better? You might get to 50%. Honestly, then the next question is, let's make sure we have the right organoid models or translatability models, and you take a bet. You take a bet. We take a bet all the time. This is no different. So explainability isn't 100%, and I don't think that's true even for many of the drugs we have. They go on the market, and then you have other things that come up, and you don't need. I never saw the safety, issue in like 150 patients. So I take it as a given that there's going to be things we cannot explain. But have we done everything possible, and have we been transparent about the limitations or sometimes the wins? There is a drug in our preclinical pipeline, which there is polypharmacology, and it cannot explain 100%. The team's still working on it, but the data is amazing. And so, do we stop it? Do we not? And this is where you also work with the agency and regulators and so forth. But there are other areas that we have to make sure you can explain your things, like in terms of your protocol, how you're finding patients, diversity and inclusion in your trials. There's no excuse not to be able to explain that. So I think just being upfront about it, but science, I mean, how much do we really know about biology? 20% max? So, yeah, so there's dark space.
So we will get to hear more from Najat as part of the full panel later on, but thank you very much.